"What time is my son's funeral?" I asked, holding my phone so tightly my fingers had gone numb. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel intentional. Then Ashley's voice came through, calm, almost bored. "He's long gone." I thought I had misheard her. For a moment, I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the sunlight spilling across the counter like it was any other morning, like my world hadn't just tilted off its axis. "I'm sorry," I said, because that's what polite people say when they don't understand cruelty. "The funeral was yesterday," she added, as if she were reminding me about a missed lunch reservation. "There wasn't really a need for you to be there." I didn't say anything after that. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the counter beside the black dress I had bought the day before, still folded neatly in its department store bag, the receipt tucked inside like proof of a future that no longer existed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been 3 days since I got the call about Daniel, and every hour since then had felt like I was walking through water, slow and heavy, waiting for someone to tell me what to do next. I had expected instructions, details, something. A time. A place. A chance to say goodbye. Instead, there was nothing. No call from family. No message from friends. Just silence. And now this. I walked over to the dining table where Daniel used to sit when he came by on Sundays, back when Sundays still meant something. His chair was pushed in, perfectly aligned, like he might walk in at any moment and pull it out again. I reached for it without thinking, my hand brushing the wood, and for a second, I could almost hear his voice, warm and steady, asking if I had made too much food again. I pulled my hand back. That version of my life was gone. According to Ashley, it had been gone long enough to bury. I turned toward the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. A woman in her late 60s, silver hair pinned neatly, eyes that looked older than they had a week ago. I had spent the morning preparing. I ironed that black dress. I laid out my shoes. I even picked out the small gold necklace Daniel gave me years ago, the one I always wore on important days. I thought today would be one of those days. I thought I would stand beside my son one last time. Instead, I was standing alone in a quiet house, learning that goodbye had already happened without me. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, steady realization settling into place. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't grief making people careless. This was a decision. And someone had made it without me. I did not call anyone after that. I did not call Ashley back, and I did not call any of Daniel's friends. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet of the house, as if it might offer me an explanation. It never did. By late afternoon, the sunlight had shifted across the kitchen floor, and I realized I was still wearing the same clothes from the morning, still standing in the same place where everything had changed. I moved slowly then, like I had to relearn how to exist in a world that no longer included my son. I folded the black dress back into its bag, smoothing the fabric carefully, as if neatness could restore some kind of order to what had happened. I placed it on the chair by the door, not because I planned to return it, but because I could not bring myself to put it away. The house carried pieces of Daniel everywhere I looked. His old coffee mug sat in the cabinet, the one with a faded baseball logo he refused to throw out. A pair of gloves he left behind last winter was still tucked into the coat closet. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things you only notice when someone is no longer there to use them. I walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch, the same spot where he used to sit when he visited, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, talking about work, about traffic, about things that seemed so unimportant now. I tried to remember the last time I saw him. Not the last holiday or the last phone call, but the last moment when everything still felt normal. It came to me slowly. A quiet Sunday afternoon. He had stopped by for less than an hour. Ashley had stayed in the car, saying she had errands to run. He had seemed distracted, checking his phone more than usual, his smile shorter, like he was already somewhere else. I remembered asking him if everything was all right, and he had said yes, too quickly. I remembered the way he hugged me before he left, one arm around my shoulders, brief and polite. Not the way he used to hug me when he was younger, when he would hold on for a second longer, like he did not want to let go. At the time, I told myself he was just busy, that life changes, that people grow up and move on. I had accepted those explanations because they were easier than asking harder questions. Now, sitting there in the quiet, those small moments felt different. Not random, Not harmless. They felt like pieces of something I had not been allowed to see. I stood up and walked to the hallway table where I kept my phone. There were no missed calls, no messages, no condolences. It was as if Daniel had vanished from the world without leaving a trace, except for the space he left behind in me. I picked up the phone and opened my contacts, scrolling down to his name. I did not press it. I just looked at the letters that now meant something final in a way I was not ready to accept. Then I closed the screen and set the phone back down. If there had been a funeral yesterday, there would be records. There would be a place, a time, someone who had been there. Grief made things heavy, but it did not erase facts. And for the first time since Ashley's voice went quiet on the other end of that call, a thought began to form, steady and clear. I had not missed something. Something had been kept from me. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm I had set out of habit, not because I had anywhere to be, but because my body had not yet caught up with the truth. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then it returned all at once, quiet and heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the empty space beside me, the place where I used to keep a folded sweater Daniel had given me years ago. I had moved it to the closet last winter, telling myself I did not need to hold on to everything. Now I wished I had left it there. I stood up slowly and went to the kitchen, making coffee the same way I always did, measuring it out carefully, letting the machine run while I stared at nothing in particular. The routine felt almost disrespectful, like the world should have paused, like something this big should have stopped time. But the coffee brewed, the clock ticked, and the light came through the window just the same. I carried the mug to the table and sat down, wrapping my hands around it, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. Then I reached for my phone again. This time, I did not scroll. I searched. I typed Daniel's full name into the search bar, adding the word obituary at the end, because that is what people do when someone passes. I expected something to come up. A notice. A service time. A place where his name would be written properly, respectfully, surrounded by the details of a life that mattered. Instead, the screen stayed almost empty. A few outdated listings. A business profile from years ago. Nothing recent. Nothing that acknowledged that he was gone. I refreshed the page. I checked again, slower this time, reading every line more carefully. Still nothing. I felt a small, sharp shift inside me. Not panic. Not yet. Just a quiet correction of what I thought I understood. If there had been a service, there would be a record. Even the smallest towns had online notices now. I set the phone down and stood up, moving toward the hallway closet where I kept a small stack of documents. Birth certificates, insurance papers, old records I had organized over the years because that is what you do when you are the one who keeps things in order. I pulled out the folder with Daniel's information and placed it on the table, opening it slowly. His full name, his date of birth, the spelling I knew by heart. I checked it against what I had typed. It matched. There was no mistake there. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it, feeling the thickness of the papers, the weight of everything that proved he existed. Then I picked up my keys. I did not call ahead. I did not ask for permission. I drove to the first funeral home in our area, the one Daniel's father had used years ago, the one families trusted because it had been there for decades. The drive took about 15 minutes, but it felt longer, like every stoplight was giving me a chance to turn around and pretend none of this was happening. I did not turn around. I parked, walked inside, and waited until someone approached me. The woman at the front desk smiled politely, the kind of smile people use when they expect a simple question. I returned it with the same calm expression I had been wearing since yesterday. "I am looking for information about a service," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My son." She nodded and asked for his name. I gave it to her. She typed it into her computer, her fingers moving quickly, confidently. Then she paused. Her smile did not disappear, but it changed slightly, becoming more careful. She looked back at me and shook her head, just a small movement. "I am sorry," she said gently. "We do not have any records under that name." I nodded once, as if that was exactly what I expected to hear. But inside, something settled into place with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. This was no longer confusion. This was not grief making things unclear. This was absence. And absence, when it is this precise, is never an accident. I thanked her for her time and walked out of the funeral home without asking any more questions, because I already understood that the answers I needed were not going to be handed to me so easily. The air outside felt sharper than it had when I arrived, like something invisible had shifted while I was inside. I stood by my car for a moment, keys in hand, looking at the reflection of myself in the window. I did not look surprised. I did not look confused. I looked like someone who had just realized that the story she had been told did not match reality. I got into the car and sat there without starting the engine, letting the silence settle around me again. Ashley's voice echoed in my mind, calm and certain, saying it was already done, saying there was no need for me to be there. But if there had been no service here, then where had it happened, and why was there no trace of it anywhere I could find? Questions lined up one after another, but instead of overwhelming me, they began to organize themselves, like pieces of a puzzle finally turning in the right direction. I started the car and drove home, not quickly, not slowly, just steady, the way Daniel used to drive when he was focused on something important. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, unchanged and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I went inside and placed my keys on the table, then walked straight to the living room and sat down in the same spot as before. I did not turn on the television. I did not reach for my phone right away. I just sat there, letting the absence of answers become something more solid, something I could examine instead of fear. After a few minutes, I stood up and went to the small desk in the corner where I kept a notepad and a pen. I sat down and began to write. Daniel's name at the top. Underneath it, everything I knew for certain. The date I was told he passed. The time Ashley called. Her exact words. I wrote them carefully, not because I might forget, but because putting them on paper made them real in a different way. Then I drew a line and started a second list. What I did not know. Where the service was held. Who attended. Why there was no obituary. Why no one had contacted me. The questions looked simple when written out. Almost ordinary, but I could feel the weight behind each one. This was not about grief anymore. Grief would have included me, even if only in a small way. This was something else. Something controlled. Something managed. I set the pen down and leaned back in the chair, looking at the two lists in front of me. One was short. The other was growing. And right in the space between them was the truth I had not yet uncovered. I reached for my phone again, this time not to search blindly, but to choose carefully. There were only a few people left who might know something Daniel had not said out loud. People who had seen him outside of the version of life Ashley allowed me to witness. I scrolled through my contacts slowly until I found a name I had not called in months. Mark Reynolds, Daniel's friend from work. The one who used to come by occasionally, always respectful, always observant. I stared at his name for a moment, considering what I was about to do. Then I pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. And with each ring, I felt something inside me settle even further into place. I was no longer waiting to be told what had happened. I was going to find out. Mark answered on the 4th ring, his voice cautious, like he had already seen the name on the screen and was trying to decide what it meant. Mrs. Collins? He said, and there was a pause after my name that did not belong there. It is Margaret, I replied, keeping my tone even. I hope I am not calling at a bad time. No, he said quickly, too quickly. No, it is fine. Another pause followed, longer this time, filled with something I could not yet name, but could clearly feel. I did not rush to fill it. I let the silence stretch, the way I had learned people often reveal more when they are given space instead of pressure. I have a simple question, I said finally. About Daniel. His breath shifted on the other end, just slightly, but enough. Of course, he said, though it sounded more like a reflex than an answer. Do you know where his funeral was held? I asked. There it was. The moment where truth either stays hidden or begins to surface. Mark did not respond right away. I could hear something in the background, a chair moving, maybe a door closing, as if he was stepping away from something or someone. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I thought you knew, he said. That is why I am asking, I replied. Another pause, then a quiet exhale. There was no public service, he said carefully. Ashley said it was going to be private. Very small. Just immediate arrangements. Immediate arrangements. The phrase felt rehearsed, like something he had been told to repeat. Were you there? I asked. No, he admitted. I was told after the fact. She said everything had already been taken care of. I looked down at the notepad in front of me, at the second list that was beginning to fill itself in without effort. Did you see any notice? I continued. An obituary. A posting. Anything official. No, he said, and this time there was no hesitation. Nothing like that. His honesty was not comforting. It was clarifying. Mark, I said, softening my tone just enough to let him know I was not asking out of confusion anymore. When was the last time you saw my son? He did not answer right away. I could almost see him thinking, measuring what to say and what to leave out. About a week before, he said finally. At the office. And how was he? I asked. Was he well? There was a longer silence now, one that felt heavier than the others. He seemed distracted, Mark said. Not sick. Just distracted. The same word I had used in my own mind. The same detail, repeated from two different places. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that settle. Did he mention anything about arrangements? I asked. About plans. About anything that might explain this. No, Mark said. Nothing like that. If anything, he seemed like he was trying to sort something out. Personal. He did not go into detail. I nodded, even though he could not see me. Thank you, I said. You have been very helpful. Mrs. Collins, he added quickly, before I could end the call. If there is anything you need, anything at all. His voice trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. I understood why. People offer help when they sense something is wrong, even if they cannot name it. I will let you know, I replied, and then I ended the call. I set the phone down slowly and looked back at the notepad. The list of what I did not know was changing shape. Some of the questions were no longer questions. They were confirmations. No public service. No notice. No record. And most importantly, no one outside of Ashley seemed to have been involved. I picked up the pen again and drew a line through one of the questions, replacing it with a statement. This was not about privacy. This was about control. And control, when it is this, complete, is never without a reason. That evening, I did not turn on any lights until the sun had almost disappeared. I sat in the dim living room, the notepad still on the table in front of me, the two lists no longer separate in my mind, but part of the same pattern. The house felt different now, not emptier, but clearer, as if something had been stripped away and what remained was easier to see. I picked up the folder with Daniel's documents again and flipped through it more slowly this time, not looking for memories, but for structure. Insurance papers, property records, copies of agreements I had insisted on keeping, even when Daniel told me not to worry about those things. I had always believed that details mattered. Now, for the first time, I understood just how much. I found the life insurance policy near the back, the one Daniel had updated a few years ago. I remembered that conversation. He had been careful with his words, almost deliberate, explaining that it was just routine, something responsible people did. At the time, I nodded and let it go. Now I read every line. The beneficiary section was clear. My name was there. Not Ashley's. Mine. I read it twice, then a third time, tracing the letters with my finger as if they might change if I looked away. They did not. I closed the folder slowly and leaned back in my chair, letting that single fact settle into everything else I had learned. If Ashley had managed everything quietly, if she had kept the service hidden, if no one else had been involved, then this was not just about grief or privacy. This was about control over what came next. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water I did not really need, just to have something steady in my hands. I thought about the timing, the call, the absence of information, the way she had spoken, not like someone overwhelmed, but like someone closing a door. I set the glass down and reached for my phone again, this time not to search, not to ask, but to confirm. I called the insurance company listed on the policy, listening to the automated voice guide me through options that suddenly felt more important than anything else I had done that day. When a representative finally answered, I gave them my name, Daniel's name, and the policy number, reading it carefully from the paper in front of me. There was a brief pause while they verified the information. Then the woman's voice returned, professional and neutral. Yes, Mrs. Collins, she said. You are listed as the primary beneficiary. Primary, not shared, not secondary. Primary. Has a claim been filed? I asked. No, she replied. There has been no activity on this policy. I thanked her and ended the call, placing the phone down with the same steady movement I had used all day. No claim, no record, no public notice, no service anyone could confirm. I returned to the table and looked at the notepad again. The pattern was no longer incomplete. It was simply unfinished. I picked up the pen and added one more line beneath everything else. She acted too quickly. Then I set the pen down and folded my hands together, not in grief, but in quiet recognition. Whatever Ashley had done, she had assumed I would accept what I was told, that I would stay where she placed me, that I would not look beyond the edges of the story she gave me. And for a brief moment, yesterday morning, she had been right. But that moment was over. And what she had not accounted for was simple. I was not confused. I was not lost. And I was no longer waiting. The next morning, I did not wait. I did not sit at the table or reach for the notepad again. I got dressed, chose a simple coat, and left the house before the sun had fully settled into the sky. There are moments in life when hesitation feels natural, when waiting seems like the safer choice. This was not one of them. I drove straight to the county records office, the same place I had gone years ago when Daniel bought his first home, the same place where everything official eventually leaves a trace. The building had not changed. Fluorescent lights, quiet hallways, people moving slowly with folders in their hands. I walked up to the counter and waited until it was my turn, feeling none of the uncertainty I might have felt the day before. "I need to confirm a death record," I said, placing Daniel's full name clearly between us. The clerk nodded, typing it into her system with practiced ease. I watched her expression carefully, not expecting drama, just accuracy. She paused, then looked back at the screen, then at me. "I am not finding anything under that name," she said. The words were simple, direct, final in a way that cut through everything else. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone gentle, giving me room to correct a mistake. "Yes," I replied. "I am sure." She searched again, slower this time, adjusting filters, checking alternate spellings. The result did not change. "I am sorry," she said. "There is no record filed." I nodded once, thanked her, and stepped aside, letting the next person take my place. I did not feel shock. I did not feel confusion. I felt confirmation. Outside, the air was cool, and I took a slow breath, letting it settle into me. No record meant something very specific. It meant that whatever Ashley had told me was not just incomplete. It was false. I stood there for a moment, watching cars move through the parking lot, people coming and going, unaware that the version of reality I had been given was unraveling piece by piece. Then I walked back to my car and sat down, placing both hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine. I closed my eyes briefly, not to escape, but to organize. Ashley's words. No service anyone could verify. No obituary. No insurance claim. And now, no official record. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. I opened my eyes and reached for my phone, scrolling to Ashley's name. I did not press call immediately. I looked at it, considering not what I would say, but what I would not say. I would not accuse. I would not demand. Not yet. People reveal more when they believe they are still in control. I pressed call. It rang longer this time than before, as if she was deciding whether to answer. When she finally did, her voice carried that same calm tone, but now I could hear something else beneath it. Alertness. "Margaret," she said, measured. "Is everything all right?" I almost smiled at that. "I went to the county office this morning," I said, my voice even, almost conversational. Silence answered me, brief but noticeable. "They could not find any record," I continued. Another pause, longer now. Then she spoke again, her tone shifting. Just slightly, adjusting. "These things take time," she said. "Paperwork, processing. It is not always immediate." It was a reasonable explanation, almost convincing, if I had not already confirmed everything else. "Of course," I replied softly. "I just wanted to make sure everything was being handled properly." "It is," she said quickly. "I have taken care of everything." Taken care of everything. I let the words settle, repeating them silently, noting the certainty in her voice. "Good," I said. "That is good to hear." I did not press further. I did not challenge her. "I will call you later," I added, and ended the call before she could respond. I set the phone down and started the engine, pulling out of the parking lot with the same steady movement as before. She still believed I was asking questions. She still believed I was looking for reassurance. What she did not understand was that I was no longer asking. I was verifying. And now, I knew exactly where to look next. I did not go home right away. Instead, I drove across town to the bank where Daniel had opened his first account years ago, the same branch where I had co-signed papers when he was just starting out, when everything between us was still simple and transparent. The building looked the same, glass doors, quiet lobby, the faint sound of keyboards and polite conversations. I walked inside and approached the front desk, my steps steady, my expression calm. "I need to speak with someone about an account," I said, giving Daniel's full name with the same clarity I had used all morning. The woman nodded and directed me to a desk near the back, where a man in a dark suit greeted me with a professional smile. I sat down across from him, placing my hands neatly in my lap, and waited for him to ask. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Collins?" he said. I met his eyes, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. "I would like to confirm the status of my son's accounts," I said, "and any recent activity." He nodded, turning to his computer, asking for identification, for verification, for the details that make things official. I provided everything without hesitation. There is a certain calm that comes when you know you are no longer guessing. He typed for a moment, then paused, scrolling, his expression shifting slightly, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. "There have been some recent inquiries," he said carefully. "Attempts to access account information." I did not react. "By whom?" I asked. He hesitated, choosing his words. "A request was made by a spouse," he said, "but it was not completed. The authorization did not match the account requirements." I let that settle for a moment, feeling the quiet confirmation align with everything else I had discovered. "And the accounts themselves?" I asked. "Are they active?" "Yes," he replied. "No withdrawals. No transfers. Everything remains as it was. Untouched. Preserved. Waiting." I nodded once, then reached into my bag and placed a copy of the insurance policy on the desk, sliding it toward him. "I am listed as the primary beneficiary," I said. "I would like to ensure that no unauthorized changes can be made moving forward." His posture shifted slightly, more attentive now, recognizing the direction of the conversation. "We can place additional safeguards," he said. "Alerts, restrictions, documentation requirements." "Do that," I replied, my tone still even, still measured. He began the process, explaining each step, each layer of protection, each detail that would prevent access without my direct involvement. I listened, not because I needed to understand every technical point, but because I understood the purpose. Control was being restored. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, piece by piece. When he finished, he handed me a set of documents to review. I read them carefully, signing where needed, my signature steady, unchanged. When I stood up to leave, he offered a polite nod, the kind given to someone who has handled something serious with composure. I returned it and walked out of the bank, the afternoon light brighter now, clearer. In the car, I placed the folder on the passenger seat and sat for a moment, looking straight ahead. Ashley had tried to move quickly. She had tried to act before anyone could question the sequence of events, before anything could be checked, before I could step in. But she had made one mistake. She assumed I would remain where she left me. She assumed I would accept the version of reality she provided. And now, as I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, I understood something with complete certainty. She was still acting, still moving, still trying to reach something she believed was already within her grasp. And she had no idea that every path she was taking was slowly being closed. I returned home just before evening, the sky beginning to dim in that slow, quiet way that makes everything feel suspended between one day and the next. I did not rush inside. I stood by the front door for a moment, holding the folder from the bank, feeling the weight of it in my hands, not heavy in pounds, but in meaning. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me with the same stillness as before, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt like a place where decisions would be made. I placed the folder on the table beside my notepad and removed my coat, folding it neatly over the chair, maintaining the same order I had always kept, even when everything else had begun to shift. Then I sat down and opened the folder again, reviewing the documents I had signed, the safeguards now in place, the confirmations written in clear, official language. Everything was still where it should be, untouched, protected. I reached for my phone, not to search, not to ask, but to initiate something I had been preparing for since that first call. I scrolled to Ashley's name again and pressed call. This time, she answered almost immediately. "Margaret," she said, her voice controlled, but there was something else beneath it now, something tighter, something less certain than before. "I was just about to call you." I allowed a brief pause before responding, just enough to let her words settle. "That is good," I said calmly. There are a few things we need to clarify. Silence followed, not empty, but attentive. I went to the bank today, I continued, my tone steady, factual, without accusation. There have been attempts to access Daniel's accounts. The silence deepened. I could almost hear her thinking, adjusting, recalculating. That must be a misunderstanding, she said after a moment, her voice smoothing out again. I was only trying to make sure everything was handled properly. Of course, I replied softly. That is what you told me yesterday. I let that sit between us, not as a challenge, but as a reminder. I have also confirmed the insurance policy, I added. No claim has been filed. Another pause. Longer this time. These things take time, she repeated, the same phrase. But now it sounded practiced, less natural. Paperwork, processing. Yes, I said. They do. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my eyes resting on the notepad where every detail had been written, every gap slowly filled. There is just one thing I would like to understand, I said. If everything has been handled, as you said, then why is there no record? No service. No filing. No notice. Nothing that reflects what you told me. Her breath caught, just briefly, but enough. It was the first real break in her composure. Margaret, she began, her tone shifting again, searching for control. This is not the time to question how things were managed. We are both dealing with a loss. Loss. The word sounded different now. Lighter. Less real. You are right, I said quietly. It is not the time to question. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to change the direction of the conversation. It is the time to confirm. I could feel it then, the moment where everything began to tilt, not in my favor, but toward the truth. She did not respond immediately. For the first time, she had nothing ready. No prepared answer. No simple explanation. I will be coming by tomorrow, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. There are documents we need to review together. I did not wait for her agreement. I did not ask if it was convenient. We will go through everything, I added, step by step. The silence on the other end was no longer controlled. It was uncertain. Margaret, I do not think that is necessary, she said finally, but the confidence from before was gone. It is, I replied simply. Then I ended the call. I set the phone down and looked around the room. The same room that had felt so quiet just a day ago. It was still quiet now, but it was no longer empty. It was focused. I reached for the notepad and drew a single line beneath everything I had written so far, separating what had already happened from what would come next. Then I placed the pen down and folded my hands in front of me, not in hesitation, but in readiness. She believed she had already closed the story. She believed everything important had already been decided. But tomorrow, for the first time since this began, she would no longer be the one in control of how the story continued.